All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. I'm Adam Berezin from msdynamicsworld.com, and thanks so much for joining us for today's event, Improve the Efficiency of Your Manufacturing Document Processes, which will be presented by Chris Hopper of Bottom Line Technologies. So to get this event started, please know that we invite you in the audience to add your feedback, ask questions today during the presentation as well. You can use the Q&A panel that you see to the right of the window to submit questions to our speaker. The session will be recorded and should be posted online within the next few days. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome our presenter, Chris Hopper.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam. Let me just let everyone know who I am. My name is Chris Hopper. I work in the product department at Bottom Line Technologies, and as you'll probably hear from my accent, I'm from the UK. And today, I'd just like to thank you, first of all, for taking the time to join us. And during this webinar, we're going to discuss how document management can help in manufacturing organisations. So why is document management so useful to manufacturing companies? Well, first of all, manufacturing is a highly regulated and information-rich environment, and confidence in the information exchange through the supply chain is basically of utmost importance for supplier and customer relationships, as manufacturers have many external dependencies both up and down the supply chain. And visibility of the information is key when looking for further opportunities to streamline your business and generate competitive advantages. Now, key to modern manufacturing success is using the information you have as a competitive advantage, and doing this effectively requires, both document and information management focus. So where does data and document management fit into all of this? Now, we've all got used to ERPs and MRPs helping us handle and move information very, very efficiently and quickly, and we've all got used to all of the efficiency gains that they really bring to us. But what we find is that ERPs and MRPs are great at handling data and information internally, but when you have to reach out to the real world or people outside of those ERPs that may not necessarily have licenses, or they may be suppliers or customers or whatever, ERPs and MRPs are much less good at handling that type of information. Now, document management can help bridge this gap, and essentially what it's very good at is enhancing information capture, the storage of information, particularly when it's talking about information which is outside of ERPs or MRPs, and the communication of information. Now, this can help develop customer supplier preference through basically enhancing the service levels and personalising the communications. And of course, we all understand why it's important to build customer preference so we can basically realise greater value. But it also makes a lot of sense to look at your suppliers and also become a good customer to your supplier. So next time round when you're sort of negotiating contracts, okay, you're viewed as a good customer and you get the best possible terms. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about compliance, because that's become a very important part of any manufacturing organisation now. And compliance regulations have a significant bearing on companies' documentation policies across all industries. But as we're sort of saying, manufacturing much more so than most. Now, product liability laws do vary between sectors and geographies, but in some cases they demand that documentation is retained for up to 30 years. We certainly see that in the European marketplace. And most manufacturing companies are affected in some sort of way. Now, this is really important, because if we fail to adhere to all the manufacturing regulations, it can result in the products being categorised as unfit for sale, especially in the case of things like pharmaceutical and some healthcare goods. And it will obviously have a direct impact on both your company's financial health and the relationships that you have with your customers and suppliers if you can't supply goods or if you can't order more goods in as they plan. Now, compliance regulations don't really respect interdepartmental boundaries, and there's an awful lot of compliance regulations. You can see them listed on the right-hand side of the screen. I mean, it seems to be an endless list. But the key to really meeting compliance demands without impacting operational efficiency is really automating the process. And study after study shows that if you automate your compliance processes, you can basically not only reduce your operational impact, but you can also reduce the number of compliance exceptions by about 85%. And this is largely driven by removing the opportunity for people to basically ignore manual process that surround the regulated procedures. So at the core of manufacturing documents is how they are stored and retrieved. And one of the things we're seeing is that it's become a very important step, not just internally to manage documents, but it's also become an important step for managing both suppliers and customers, because companies are now starting to use document repositories and the information they've got to communicate directly with their customers. And what we're seeing is, instead of people necessarily just sending out files to people via email or letters on paper and so on, people are increasingly using URLs to secure repositories to do essentially pass information to the customers. So the customers can self-help, the suppliers can self-help with information, okay, and it's just a much more user-friendly and value-added plus way of communicating information to customers. Now, first of all, I want to take a closer look at how you can organise document repositories. And one of the things that I always refer back to is the old black and white movies where we used to see them. You used to have filing clerks in those movies, and you could walk up to them, you could ask for a document, and they would walk into a great big library of information, and they would pull out exactly the document they needed. And the reason that they could do that stuff is a combination of two things. I mean, first of all, they really understood the documents they were dealing with, and secondly, they had elaborate indexing systems. Now, one common technique we use in computerized systems is to both capture information about the context of the document and the process which created it. And by combining these two things up, we can build up a very elaborate set of indexes so that we can access the information in lots of different ways. And consequently, once again, if we automate this process, we can provide a wide variety of indexes which will basically happen automatically, so there's very little operational impact, but we then start to leverage that information in lots of different parts of the business. Now, I want to look at this in a little bit more detail. Now, what we have here on the left is we have different process types. Now, we can all identify different process types that we have in our organisation. I've just pulled out some really obvious ones here, like accounts payable, accounts receivable, materials planning, HR, etc. All of these are discrete processes within the business. And when you sit down and think about it, a lot of the information that you can gain from that process itself before you even touch the document will help significantly in trying to retrieve those documents when they're needed. First of all, the process itself, because you tend to find that people work within limited process teams, and consequently, that is one way of drilling down into the data. Things like time and date stamps, when documents arrived, when they were edited, who processed them, supplier information, all of that is really useful information when it comes to actually trying to find a document which you've previously stored. The next thing you can also do is you can take the contents of those documents, and with modern OCR technologies and so on, you can scrape those documents and you can start to extract key information from them. So it could be part numbers, it could be part codes, it could be machine IDs, etc., etc. So you have two very rich sources of data here which can be used to build up the metadata that's required, or, as the old-fashioned filing clerks would called it, would be the indexes. And it's very, very easy to see how you can quickly build up a rich variety of indexes to access your information. Now, what our experience tells us is that once people grasp this technology and they understand how versatile and powerful it is in terms of indexing technologies, they tend to start indexing from every single conceivable angle. And what we really recommend to customers is, first of all, that you index according to a really limited number of indexes to start, to establish the system, get it running, getting people used to working in that way. But as the number of documents which you start to accumulate and you start to store using a document repository increases, you will need to add in extra indexes so you can drill down and find those documents with greater granularity. So our recommendation is very much look at these systems, put them in place in a single format, get people to buy into the process, and once people are bought into the process and they start to see the benefits, then start to elaborate the process and build it out even further. But underneath this basic premise of capturing indexes from processes and content of the document, you've obviously got the repository. And so what I wanted to do was quickly show you an example of a document repository. And the example we're using is one of the products we use, but I mean most document repositories are going to have similar functionality. And this is Transform Content Center. And essentially what you can sort of see here is you can see the category, which in our case, as we've discussed it already on this webinar, would be the process that it's associated with. Then the metadata, i.e. all of the searchable fields which we kind of identified and we started indexing by. Then we can see the indexing information, and then finally we can also specify which fields are mandatory and which aren't. Now that's not so much important if you've got an automated process, because those fields will tend to get filled in automatically. But you tend to also find that if you automate key core processes, you normally get a very, very quick return on investment. But if you have documents which arrive not very often, you can once again still specify how they're stored, but ask for that information to be manually captured. And it sometimes makes sense to kind of be a little bit more loose about the indexes which you specify that must be mandatory and the ones which are optional, just so that people can still kind of get the data in without having much of an operational impact. And when we look under the document repository, it builds a file system, and this is what a raw search on that file system would look like. Essentially, you can see along the top here we have lots of the different indexes which we search. We could probably just click on those and sort them accordingly. And then once you can see there, you can see the document which you would access via any of those indexes. Okay, you can see it's very, very quick and easy to kind of build this stuff up. And whilst this particular user face is maybe not the most friendly, using application interfaces or individual apps associated to drill into this data, what you can end up doing is taking, say, the HR department logging into certain areas of document repository. You could have maybe materials management looking at other areas of document repository, and you can quickly define the fields which they have visibility of and the fields which they have access to, and make the whole thing much more manageable on a cross-departmental basis. Now, one of the nice things about this, once you start to build up a document repository in this way, is you can start to basically build inferences between different types of documents. And now a good example of this is, which can prove to be very useful, is if we look at things like purchase orders and invoices. Now, it could be that you issue several POs to a particular supplier, and they decide that they're going to basically pull all of those POs together and invoice you a single invoice, a single shipment with a single GRN. Now, normally that would be quite difficult trying to tie up multiple POs to a particular invoice. But what you could quickly see is by searching on the particular invoice number in that document repository, it would list up all of the POs that would be associated with. So you can start to get inferred relationships between what would normally be discrete documents. And this can have like a significant impact on the visibility you have in terms of, in this case, the goods that you have, on order, if there's any material shortages, or indeed, if you were to take a situation where a supplier could not fulfill an order in a complete way, you could quickly identify if they were short shipping in terms of what they'd invoiced you versus what you'd actually ordered. Now, obviously, in a lean manufacturing environment, that has got a massive advantage, because the greater the visibility you get of those shortages or those deltas in supply, the more opportunity you have to fix that before it hits your production lines. And one of the common things, I used to work for a big manufacturer of IT equipment, and one of the things we used to do is we used to ship information in from, or ship a lot of stuff in from Japan and China, and we would typically get about 5 weeks notice between, when the manufacturer would invoice us, okay, FOB, and when the goods were due to arrive. And that essentially gave us 5 weeks to start negotiating and trying to fix those supply chain problems or rework our production planning to accommodate this. So it gives you a lot of information, and it basically protects you from downtime. Now, if we then look at these kind of document repositories and the kind of information that's being shared, it's worth thinking about, what improvements manufacturers typically expect to gain from this kind of information. Now, according to the Aberdeen Group, which is a respected research company in this area, what they say is that 43% of manufacturers expect to basically improve their time to market for new products by sharing information in this way. It could be about the design phase, it could be about just better materials planning, etc., etc. But it's definitely one of the things that manufacturers identify as a bonus. 29% aim for better innovation in the process. It could be sharing parts that are available, it could be sharing the prices on parts that are available to help drive the costs down. 26% expect to reduce their operational costs simply by doing things more efficiently and in a more intelligent way because they now have visibility and control over the information. And 42% of manufacturers expect to have a higher level of enterprise-wide visibility, and this results in basically faster response times both to internal inquiries interdepartmentally, which helps you work more efficiently by about 30%, and also to your suppliers and customers, so building those better relationships and driving customer preference. Now, I want to take a closer look at some of those downstream benefits very, very quickly. I'm not going to go through this slide in a lot of details, but I just want to pull out a couple of examples. Now, if we look at something like an AP automation system where we're comparing your invoices, GRNs, sign-off processes, POs, etc. Okay, by sharing the information that's captured in that process on an enterprise level, it basically allows a lot of departments to operate a little bit more efficiently. I'm just going to pull out 3 examples here. So, for instance, the treasury within a business, okay, can optimize decisions about both cash generation and how they use the cash. They can prioritize payments, and that's very important in manufacturing companies which tend to be very highly leveraged, working on lower margins and maybe service level companies. So how to optimize the use of the cash that's available in your business has a significant impact on the bottom line. It could also affect procurement. I mean, typically if you look at manufacturing companies, you tend to have a lot of suppliers, especially if you're bringing in sub-assemblies and so on. Allowing procurement to see, the frequency of orders, the frequency of invoices, where the high-value orders are, which suppliers we're ordering the most items from, allows them to focus in on where they can spend their negotiating efforts. Obviously, it's difficult to negotiate with every supplier every single time you go around the circuit, but by focusing them on, you can get a much better result and start to reduce your costs. And likewise, management can look to see who the important suppliers are, who the important customers are, and make sure that those suppliers and customers are optimally managed, basically reducing risk to the business. Now let's take a look at how document management can help in terms of information capture. Now, manufacturers receive large quantities of information from businesses and partners and even authorities in free-form PDF and paper documents. Now, according to AIM, which is another major research company, introducing paper into business processes can reduce productivity by about 300%. And that just shows really how good ERPs and MRPs have become at managing data internally. Once you have paper introduced into those processes, it really makes them stumble and trip up a little bit. So manufacturers are basically seeking to remove the paper from these processes at the earliest possible opportunity. So what I'm going to use is, I'm going to use an example of, once again, an AP automation process, because that's become a very, very common solution, okay, as an example of how you can capture information from free-form documents. And what first of all we have to do is we have to capture the information into a common format. So if it's an electronic file which is sent over to you and it's not in that common format, we would recommend transferring it into a PDF format. So PDF files are very, very versatile. There's a lot of strength to those in terms of searchability, access. You can even get PDF readers to read files out for you. So it's a very powerful file format. And likewise, if a document comes in paper format, we would recommend that you scan that document, and most scanners these days will give you the option to scan that file into PDF format. So now we have a common file format. The next thing we need to do is we need to extract the data from that common file format. Now, if you look at OCR technology is pretty much standard. It's not really a point of differentiation from any supplier these days. Most OCRs are capable of capturing about 98% accurately per character, And as it turns out, most OCR software comes from one of 7 suppliers in the world, so it tends to be rebadge opportunities. So it's not really a point of differentiation for anybody that might be trying to promote systems to you. However, underneath OCR technology, there's another technology called fingerprinting, which is extremely useful. And what fingerprinting typically does is it looks through documents and it tries to identify key terms. So if it was an invoice, for instance, it would look at things like sales tax, it could look at totals, it could look at purchase order numbers, and it would scour the area around those key strings, looking for the associated values, what your supplier number is, what your customer number is, what the VAT value is, etc. And likewise, if it was some sort of manufacturing specification document, you could search for other strings in them and pull the appropriate data off around those strings. That would be very straightforward. And what we would then do is we'd export that data in 2 formats. We'd export the original copy of the image file, okay, so for reference purposes, and in some cases you may find that you need to keep a legal copy of that. But we would then also extract all that useful metadata that we talked about, and we would basically extract that into a table, so that we could use the metadata to both retrieve that document, and of course we've now extracted an awful lot of information from these documents, which is searchable and more usable. And we would essentially put that into a document repository. Now, once we kind of have this, we have both a referenceable source of the original document, and we have documents which are far more accessible, far more useful, far more controllable, and quite frankly, of much higher value. Now, excuse me. Another key feature of document management systems is that they're also very effective at importing information from a variety of formats, electronic formats, formatting that data and delivering it into other formats. And this makes them extremely powerful go-between tools, allowing information to be captured or reformatted between a wide variety of devices or systems or information services. So they're very, very good like translation and connection tools. Now, it's proven very difficult to standardize on a lot of the in-out communication flows of manufacturing equipment, because if you start to look at the equipment requirements and the types of equipment, the requirements for an RFID encoder are going to be very different to the information that needs to be passed in and out of a CNC device or a handheld reader. And so consequently, it's become very, very difficult to standardize on this, and ERP systems really struggle with keeping up with these changes. So when you look at these things, not only are they different standards, but they also quickly evolve. So for instance, if I look at something like an RFID standard, there's lots of different RFID standards, they're constantly evolving. And every time that RFID standard changes, once again, the ERP system would have to adapt. And they're just not very good for that. Now, essentially, once you look at document output systems or document management systems, because we kind of have these very strong user-intuitive interfaces, which allow us to take information from lots of different sources and output it to lots of different sources with very graphical type tools to sit between them, there are very quick and effective ways of getting these devices to talk together. And we're seeing more and more companies that want to capture information from production machines and pull it into the ERPs. And they're finding that document systems are one of the most powerful and versatile tools that will allow them to actually integrate them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about information communication, because, that's an area of strength of document management systems. Now, traditionally, when we talk about document management systems, we think about producing branded documents for customer presentment, making beautiful invoices, beautiful forms, instantly recognizable documents. And I think most people understand that, so I'm not going to talk about that in a lot of detail, although I will touch on it shortly. But what I want to do is I kind of want to reframe this slightly, and what you'll find is that most document management systems these days have become very powerful information delivery tools, which can significantly streamline processes. They can intelligently deliver information, okay, and they can manipulate the formats both for machines and people. And what we're sort of seeing is that more and more people are using document management systems to deliver information to machines. It could be like printers, it could be encoders, it could be repositories. It could in fact be pretty much anything where you need to deliver the information electronically. And we're also seeing a significant move towards hybrid communications, where the information is presented both in terms of like a human digestible format, like these beautiful laid out forms, and also in machine processable format to enable downstream processes. We also need to look at the output capabilities, and when we talk about information transfer, we really need to concentrate on three primary areas. I mean, first of all, how the information is transferred. Okay. Secondly, how we store the information, and as we kind of sort of seen, we can already do some really powerful things there. But that's becoming much more complicated as we need to open up, document repositories, document storage areas to both suppliers and customers to enhance their experience to us and basically position ourselves as a better supplier or better customer to them. And finally, we need to kind of look a little bit in terms of how we deliver this information. Now, one of the things we did talk about was capturing output for compliance. And we've already discussed this and how automating manufacturing and financial compliance tasks can reduce non-conformity by up to 85%, simply by reducing the opportunity to opt out of manual processes. Now, this is something that's very, very simple to do in terms of like document management systems. And essentially what we would do in a document management system is we will basically take any output that's coming out of a regulated process, and we will stream off in a parallel process that document and file it in a document repository. This essentially means that you're going to capture a high proportion of those normal standard regulated process documents without having any operational impact. It's a very, very straightforward approach which overcomes a significant problem which a lot of manufacturing companies are currently experiencing. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk much about human information presentment. Most companies understand the need for customer and supplier presented information to be fully branded so that people can find your invoices quickly. They understand the documents from your company. It makes them instantly recognisable and all that sort of stuff. But it's an area that ERPs have really traditionally struggled in. And obviously document output management systems are very effective in this area. Now, the reason that many ERPs have struggled in this area is because once again, they don't necessarily have the breadth of peripheral device control that an output management system would have. ERPs tend to be focused on process and workflow enablement, and consequently keeping up with lots of different devices is something that's very difficult to do. And consequently, you find that a lot of the interfaces for ERPs, they're very, very close to being almost a programming environment to get the forms, the output that you need on a particular printer. And that, consequently, it gets a little bit more difficult if you want to publish it to a web page or if you want to put it out to a mobile device. And they struggle a little bit out with that. And quite frankly, this is kind of obviously an area where document management systems excel, very strong tools, graphically orientated, and quite honestly, if your designing tool is much more difficult than PowerPoint in terms of like allowing you to lay out a document and get that information in the format you want it to, it's probably preventing you delivering the quality of the output that you require or that your customers demand. But I think that's a fairly well understood area, so I'm going to skip quickly on from that. And I want to talk about some less familiar territory in this context, and that's machine-to-machine communications. So what's really important in this context? And the things that are important are that your system must be able to translate between various file formats. It must be able to pull in data from like XML files, ASCII files, HTML files. And it must also equally be able to output the data in those various formats in order to basically, communicate out to whatever type of machine it is. It could be something simple like a handheld device. It could be a mobile phone. It could be a screen. It could be a web page. But equally, the output device could be an RFID encoder, a barcode printer, a production machine. It could be pretty much any machine which you need to deliver information to in your production environment. You should also be able to reorder fields into the correct order, because the demands of different devices often mean that you have to reorder the fields from one device when you send it to another device. It could also be you need to kind of augment that data, add in extra fields. Sometimes this is going to be blank, sometimes it means reaching out to another database to fill out those fields as you go along. But that would make a big difference to your machine-to-machine communication. Okay. You should also be able to electronically sign any of your communications to prevent tampering with. And once again, we're sort of saying this is very important, especially with highly regulated documents. If you can sign those documents and electronically lock them, which is another strength of PDF files, what it means is that when the regulators or the auditors come around, they can see that you have this document, it's time-stamped, it's digitally signed. They will have a high degree of confidence that that document is as it should be. Likewise, if you were presented with another document, another electronic document which did not look right to you, you could equally check that document and see if it had your document locks and timestamps applied to it, to see if it had been changed or not. So once again, it's a nice way of protecting yourself with any information which you have to deliver out. Now, the example I've got on screen is a system that we use quite a lot, and it is relevant to the manufacturing environment. Okay, but it kind of just shows a few stages, and it's something we see an awful lot of customers doing, and it's highly productized. And then what we're really doing here is we're basically taking a payments file for a bank. And the first thing we do is we look at that payments file, we scan the data, and we understand what bank that is, because different banks all have different ways in which you need to kind of present to them payments data. So we will reformat that file into the appropriate format. We'll add in files, we'll blank out files if they're not required, but we'll make sure that the file is as ready for the bank to produce. Now, some banks also require security layers around the product, and we call those PKI envelopes. And they're typically implemented using a hardware security model, which is an external device. It's a big black box. Now, if the bank also demands that, we'll go out, we'll sign that document, we'll secure that document and get it ready for transfer. And in this case, what it does is it has several advantages. What we've basically done is we've automated the process. Because it's a payment process, it means that people don't have access to the individual files, and so it prevents any fraud or manipulation of the numbers. And essentially, it takes the stress out, it reduces the operational impact. But you can start to see different ways that it's very simple to kind of manipulate files and augment those files for a target device, which in this case would be the bank's payment system. Now, I touched upon how hybrid communications is becoming much more important, and it's something we're starting to see an awful lot of. And essentially what we're finding is that, when you talk to suppliers or customers, they very much want the electronic files which accompany documents. So, for instance, if you're going to place a purchase order on a supplier and there was, say, I don't know, 500 parts on that, and you have an automated system which can generate an order for 500 parts, the truth of the matter is that your supplier would benefit tremendously if you could provide that file in an electronic format as well as a standard purchase order format. And a simple way of doing this is taking the document management system, which has access to this raw data, producing your purchase order, and at the same time just building a CSV file or an ASCII file or HTML file with all of that electronic data in it, so that the supplier can automatically upload that information into their system, reducing manual errors, reducing time. They can process the orders faster, and once again, it makes life easy for them, and so it helps you to become a better customer for them and you to get better terms and conditions off them. Now, the simplest way of doing that is just simply outputting the purchase order file and then also wrapping that up in an email which also has the electronic file with it. What we're starting to see is a lot of people then taking that PDF file, okay, or the output file, and putting things like QR codes on it. Now, the QR code will basically give them information, or your supplier the information where they can go to pull up an electronic version of that file from your document repository. So effectively the supplier can self-help. And we're now starting to see people go one step further, and that is that what they're really doing is they're putting the electronic documents along with the electronic data Okay, so we've got a PDF file of the purchase order with several formats of the electronic data into a document repository, and all they're really doing is they're delivering a single URL where their supplier can grab access to that information. And that's, once again, it's a nicer way of doing things, because the supplier can basically understand they've received an email, they can go, they can look to see the repository, and they can self-help. Okay. But it also means that if you're producing large quantities of invoices, you only need to send the URL once, and the supplier can go down and he can download lots of multiple documents at the same time, and it will help with their workflows. But it's not just about helping with their workflows. There's another really good reason to be doing this and using a document repository as a communications tool to both suppliers and customers. And if we think about typical workflow, I mean, traditionally, you know, I'll take an example of an invoice here. I mean, typically what we would do with an invoice is we produce an invoice, we'd print it out, we'd send it to the customer, it'd take a couple of days to get there, it would go into their filing system, it would take a long time to process. So it was kind of hard to get invoices paid very quickly. Now, if we start to use a document repository to do this, okay, not only can we just email the customer the documents, okay, but that works to some degree. But most customers, when they get a request for an email receipt to be sent, they'll typically turn around and say, no, I'm not going to send an email receipt. I don't want you to know this. And they will typically do that if you put an invoice into an email. However, if you put a link into an email where they can pull up their invoice by referencing the document repository, you still have full visibility of that invoice. The customer's opened it up, and so if later down the stream the customer says, I haven't seen that invoice, you have a proof point. You can sort of say, well, actually, you opened this document up 20 days ago, we have delivered it to you, and so you can basically put you in a position of strength when you're chasing that payment on time from the supplier. Likewise, you could use this in other ways. You could make sure that if you were supplying particular parts to another manufacturer, that they have access to certificates of conformity or whatever, or manufacturer's declarations of conformity. Or alternatively, you're placing orders on a supplier and you issue that link. You can once again sort of say, here's my purchase order, here's a link to my repository. And if they haven't opened that repository up and they haven't opened up those data files within 3 or 4 days, you can get on the phone and chase it up to make sure they're actually processing that order, to make sure that your supply chain is functioning highly efficiently. So it gives you that level of efficiency and visibility and control which you wouldn't normally have, and that's a major benefit. Another area which you can use document management for is actually enhancing the information which you communicate to customers. And a great example of this is we've got a customer in Belgium, and what they do is when they produce a picking note for their warehouse, they take the picking note and they strip out all of the part numbers from that picking note, and they use those part numbers to auto-generate the documentation. So once they auto-generate the documentation from PDF files, they concatenate it onto the back of the GRN note, and they basically ship the latest documentation along with it. And that means that the documentation is always up to date, 100%. It means the terms and conditions are always 100% up to date. And so it means that it significantly reduces the costs of them producing all the documentation, the instruction manuals, terms and conditions, warranty information with each individual item they sell. Basically it allows them to provide a better level of service to their customers. And finally, another thing that you find in document management systems is that they tend to be very strong at rule-based delivery. Now, one example that we see quite regularly is we see people like trying to manage warehouse locations and forms inside ERPs, and that presents a significant overhead on the ERP, which could be probably better managed with a document automation system. So if, for instance, we were going to produce a shipping note, I mean, in this example what we're doing is we're first of all producing that shipping note. We're then looking at the shipping note and seeing what that part number is. We're going back to the database and trying to figure out which warehouse that particular item is held in. If it's in warehouse B, which may be in Belgium, or if it's in warehouse A, which may happen to be in the United States, okay, it will route the document to the appropriate printer. The next thing that we do is we actually refer to the ERP's product information. because in this case we're shipping the document to America and we have two different suppliers that we can use for shipment. One of those suppliers can basically ship documents which are less than 5 kilograms, much cheaper than the other one, and so we understand what printer we have we're directing the output to, and we can also provide the right shipping note for the right logistics supplier. So once again, it's a way of kind of managing costs down. Now, this is kind of a really simple example, but it's really straightforward to see how you can take the same decision-making approach to basically personalize information delivery. It could be a customer's express preference to receive their information formatted for a mobile device. Or it could be that they want it on a particular output device, or they want to put directly into their repository. You could manage those things to build that customer preference up. Okay, you can make sure that information goes direct to the customer's preferred delivery point, or the supplier's preferred delivery point. You can reformat and lay out the information depending on exactly what information that supplier or customer wants. They may not want all the information in the file, so you can simplify that process. You can reformat data files into a format which your supplier or customer may want to do, once again making you differentiate yourself. And we've got another customer that's a big telecoms customer in Europe, and they also use this capability. They have maybe 20 different types and categories of customers that all have different invoice requirements based on if it's an industrial usage, if it's just domestic usage, if it's like small business usage. And what they do is they send all of their invoices out via one stream, and they use their document management system to basically manage exactly what information is delivered to which individual customers on an individualized basis. Once again, helping them stand out from some of the other suppliers and their competitors in the marketplace. Now, I've talked an awful lot today about things. I just want to kind of review and talk about some of the things we talked about. And essentially what I'm really sort of saying is document management tools are powerful tools that can help maximize the value of your ERP and MRP systems. ERP and MRP systems are not very good at handling data externally, but by basically bridging the gap between your suppliers, your your customers, and internal users, right, you can start to leverage the information held within them to basically maximize the return that you're getting. Essentially, I'm also sort of saying that automating document and information management can reduce repetitive manual tasks. It can increase accuracy by reducing a lot of manual keying. It can enable a lot of business efficiencies and opportunities like treasury management or procurement management. Okay, and it can also help reduce regulatory exceptions, keep the regulators off your backs, make that stuff easy, reduce the operational impact that conforming to those regulations needs. You can also use output capabilities to basically drive customer preference and supplier preference. You can use it to make workflows more efficient, and you can also use it to automate compliance needs. Now, I've spoken for about 40 minutes now, non-stop. That's really what I wanted to say. It's a fairly high-level introduction to how document management can help in a manufacturing process. I hope you've taken away some good ideas in terms of things that you could potentially leverage moving forward at some time in the future. And I'd just like to really open the basically pass you back to Adam, who will open the lines for any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. So Chris will be happy to take your questions, as he mentioned. So there's a Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you want to just type in any questions that you have, we'll be sure to get to them. Chris will just give people a minute or so to kind of collect their thoughts.
Thank you.
Somebody actually just asked a general question. Where will the recorded session be posted on the web? We'll post it on msdynamicsworld.com under the webcast section of our site. We'll also post it on our YouTube channel. And Chris, maybe your team will be able to post it somewhere as well. So it'll be in multiple places, and we'll email everybody with a link to the recorded session.
Thank you.
See if anybody has any more questions. Chris, is there? Do you have contact info that you can give to these people in case they have questions that they want to send you offline?
Yeah, I'm very happy if you'd like to ask me directly. My work email address is chris.hopper@bottomline.com. So if you think of any other questions which you'd like to ask, then I'd be more than happy to answer them on an individual basis. I'd be delighted to hear from you. I do have a question, which is, what about the associated costs of implementing document management? How would you not say that DM has not matured yet, as there is no clear method? I would argue that's slightly different. I think that if you look at document management of the years gone past, maybe 5-6 years ago, it was relatively immature. But both Bottomline and other manufacturers out there have been doing an awful lot of things in terms of trying to productize and standardize standard product offerings for document management. And in all honesty, they're pretty well understood and you get an awful lot with standard packages. Now, inevitably, there's going to be some degree of customization that's required, but if you look at the Microsoft environment, most implementations are fairly standard, and you can go an awful long way with the standard packages. But if you have any specific questions in terms of specific items that you would like to see document management help with, we would certainly be more than happy to talk to you about that. So, for instance, one common usage we see is the compliance area, because Dynamics and SSRS doesn't necessarily lend itself to streaming off copies of regulated compliance documents. But we could show you how to do that very, very quickly and cost effectively. If you want a more detailed answer to that, then or to your individual circumstances, then please, like I said, email me on chris.hopper@bottomline.com, and I'll be more than happy to go into more detail.
All right. So I think why don't we end here? Chris, I'd like to thank you so much for presenting today. I'd also like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy days to attend the session. And as I mentioned, it will be recorded and we'll notify everybody when it's been posted online. Should be probably in the next day or so.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye.